Well, we've come to the end of this long and at times arduous journey through the Nathan Drake quadrilogy, is that how you say it, of Uncharted games. And I gotta say, Uncharted 4 is legitimately a great game. In fact, it brought back the feeling that I had when I played Uncharted 1 way back. I mean, I'm not going to go through it and obsessively play it on each harder difficulty again. I did play it on hard mode up until the final battle, but we'll get into that later. Yeah, it was a solid, fun experience that in many ways felt to me like the graduated, maybe not final form of what's possible with this franchise, but definitely the sequel I was waiting for. The one that fixed most of the issues I had with previous games, felt like a natural evolution, and really delivered on a lot of the stuff that I think these games have been hyped for this whole time. I think it was a better execution. Like, it was closer to the way people have been describing it from the beginning. And I'm like kind of proud of it in a way. It's like I played it and I was like, man, you actually did it. You actually lived up to this game series reputation in a way that the third game utterly failed to do, in my opinion. And that game was still very critically praised. To my surprise, like, I think in games journalism, maybe up until recently, I think this is starting to change a little bit, but it just seemed for a long time like if there was a certain amount of stuff in a game that like looks really good and just like on paper when described is good, then people will say it's a good game regardless of like the nitty-gritty of the execution and like how, really thinking about it. Uncharted 4, this is where it excels, is that it really is good in the ways that matter. For instance, Gunplay, unbelievably, is finally good in Uncharted 4. The guns feel good to use. In fact, the starting pistol feels good to use. Unbelievably. The like basic, most common pistol that you'll use throughout the game. It sounds right. It feels right. When you fire bullets, when enemies get hit, they react the way you would want them to react. Shooting people actually feels good in this fucking game in a way that it hasn't in any of the others so far. And I know a lot of this is because of The Last of Us, because you can see a lot of the blood of The Last of Us has gotten mixed into Uncharted in this game. In fact, it's apparent right from the title screen, because it completely breaks with the aesthetic of previous title screens, and has the same aesthetic as The Last of Us title screen. The fixation on somewhat older, more mature themes, older characters, exploring, the problems that might reach someone who's in their 40s, as opposed to the usual game protagonists of, well, I guess game protagonists do tend to be older, they just don't really face realistic issues most of the time. Not that Drake necessarily faces realistic issues, but ones that are grounded and relatable, and he finally feels like a real character in this game. Like, he's been fleshed out to a point where you have a complete picture of who he is, why he is the way he is. He finally like makes sense in a way that he never really did before. And so because of that, he's able to have a much more emotional arc in this game. And I'm not going to say that the writing is perfect. There is still some cheesiness. There's still some unbelievability in the way that characters act, mostly just characters being stupid for convenience, which has been a thing throughout all these games, but it's almost more jarring when everything else is so well done. Like, the dialogue in this game is a lot better than it's ever been, and there are a couple groaners, and I'll get into that, but overall, I just felt like if the reputation of these games is supposed to be that they have a great story, great dialogue, and great characters, this one actually has those things. And it's not that I think the characterization was ever bad in these games. I think that a lot of it came down to the performances, the sort of aesthetic persona of these characters. Each of them is they're kind of inherently interesting, particularly like Sully in the first game. Like, you automatically like him because he's this surly old cigar swilling dude, you know, who's got a great voice, and like he's just like a character archetype that's existed forever, but like done well enough that you go, ah, yeah, I love that guy, you know. And then in the second game, with the introduction of Chloe and Flynn, you know, they were again archetypes but well done. The third game, I'll give him Charlie Cutter was charming, but otherwise, I mean, he was just Jason Statham. This game not only breathes new life into some of the existing characters, but the new characters that are introduced are good. They feel like, you know, they're compelling. They have something to them that you can sink your teeth into. And moreover, the overall game design has just been ironed out a lot. It recaptures the magic of really both the first two games in ways I was surprised. So in the second game, I talked about how it felt like this non-stop climax feeling. Like you're always traveling, you're always doing something new and different, and you know, it's just very explosive and bombastic. But I do think that the second game, what it lacks in comparison to the first, is really getting engrossed in a setting. You don't have that experience like you did in the first game where you're on this island, you're really trying to get to the bottom of the mystery of this treasure, and like you spend a lot of time here and you kind of get to know the place. And granted, I don't think it did an exceptional job, but in Uncharted 4, you start off with more of the Uncharted 2 globetrotting, going to different places and, you know, seeing crazy set pieces. And then around the halfway point, the rest of the game takes place on one island that you really get to see all of. You really explore this place, and the mystery at the heart of it is actually engaging. So for me to really talk about it, I think I'm going to have to make a lot of comparisons to previous games. So in the first game, you're trying to find you're trying to find El Dorado that Sir Francis Drake had found previously. And the only real connection between the ongoing story that you're playing and, you know, the mystery you're trying to uncover is that Drake is supposedly Sir Francis Drake's descendant. So there's a little bit of interplay when you find like remnants of Drake, when you eventually find his corpse, and like there's, you know, there's some relationship to the plot, but like most of what's going on the island is pretty boring. And Uncharted has always had this issue of, in trying to make the historical stuff realistic, it's boring. It might be interesting for history nerds if like you already have context into what all this stuff is and why it's cool that there's, you know, German U-boats in the jungle, or, you know, like all this different stuff that harkens to interesting history but isn't told in an interesting way in the story itself. You pick up treasures that are just nonsense, you know. So it never felt like that. I was not invested in the story of what had happened here, the mystery of why El Dorado, you know, like was transported to all these places, stuff like that. In the second game, there's a little bit more intrigue once you get to Shambhala and you realize that, like, it, you know, everybody thinks it's this stone that created all these powerful leaders throughout time, but it turns out it was actually the water in this place. And you've got like the local natives and stuff, and like it gives you a sense of, it doesn't tell you too much, but it also doesn't tell you enough. It's like you kind of get a taste. You're like, okay, this is cool and mysterious. It's a nice aesthetic thing to have presented. But again, you're not like that deeply invested. The third game, I don't even fucking remember why they were going to the city at the end. I've already tried to blot most of that out of my memory, and I just played it a couple days ago. But in Uncharted 4, you're tracing the history of this, basically the Pirate King. Was it Thomas Avery? Forgive me if I forget everyone's names. I'm not well versed in pirate stuff. But like the fact that the people that you're chasing, like the treasure that you're chasing, belongs to pirates is thematically relevant to the characters who are themselves essentially pirates. They're treasure hunters, you know? And like the more you learn about the history of what went on with these pirates, like you start to get a picture of what exactly like they were like culturally, what they were trying to do by establishing this paradise for pirates called Libertalia. when you actually get there, you can kind of spend some time in the place and get a sense of what the culture was like there, what eventually drove it to ruin, what was going on with all these fucking pirates. And, of course, there a strong parallel is drawn between what happens between Avery and all the other pirate captains and what's going on in the plot of these backstabbings and betrayals that go on. And so, like, there's a direct connection. It feels relevant. It's presented in an intriguing way. As I was exploring the city, I legitimately wanted to know what happened. I actually was like, whoa, what's going on here? What's the story? How did this place fall to ruin? I am interested. Never felt that way about the other games, so that's a huge boost to the storytelling. Now, additionally, with the characters, in the first game, Nathan Drake is just kind of a snarky, quippy guy. He's just an adventurer. He's just an explorer. There's not like much depth to him. He's just a guy who psychotically murders lots of people in the effort to find a treasure. In the second game, there is an arc, but it doesn't give you any new information about him as a person. It's just kind of an emotional arc of him going from somebody who's overly reckless to and like self-serving to someone who has to pull some heroics and like try to save the world. In the third game, we learn about his past, and that it adds something to realize, like, how does someone like this come about? Well, it makes sense that he would have been like this orphaned kid who, had nothing. He grew up stealing. He lived in an orphanage. He was picked up by Sully and ends up in this life. And like, it's a sensible backstory for the character that starts to make him come to life a little bit, but it doesn't really go that far with it. Like, the main thrust of telling us Drake's backstory in that game is just so that we can see why he has so much pride tied up in this journey that he's on to find the particular treasure of that game. But yeah, like, in the end, it doesn't amount to much. In Uncharted 4, however, Drake, we really get a sense of why he is the way he is, because we meet his older brother, who has never been mentioned up to this point because everybody thought he was dead. And we learn about how their mom was actually this amazing historian and probably treasure hunter who had helped find all these crazy artifacts that, like, they had been hearing about this stuff at the dinner table growing up, which is why Drake knows so much about history. Him and his brother have been doing this kind of shit since they were young. They took off and, went to live this life. We're in and out of prison for a long time, so, like, we get a sense of why Drake is so violent and, like, why he's willing to kill people, because he's legit just, like, had a criminal upbringing, he has never been a normal guy. He's always been a globe-trotting, criminal. The only thing that's harder to believe about him at this point might just be his snarky personality. Like, how did he become a good guy might be the more important question. But at the same time, he hangs out with Sully. You have a sense that when he was a kid, I mean, he did go to a Catholic school, so, like, there's a little bit of morals that are infused into him because he, heard all those lectures so many times. So, like, I just think that they managed to find a combination of elements that made me believe this character finally, that made me connect with him on some level. And then from there, we have a well-crafted story that presents us with a huge emotional hurdle for him to climb in this game. But I think the most important thing about it is just painting this complete portrait of him. Like, why would he make the decisions he does in this game? I think we understand. They're justified. So Drake's brother he thought he had died in this prison escape that they did, where them and this guy Rafe were trying to get this cross that would tell them the location of Avery's treasure. But the brother supposedly died in the prison. Turns out he wasn't dead. He's just been in prison for 15 years. He's finally been let out, and supposedly he was let out by this fucking drug lord, crazy criminal guy who wants him to find the treasure within 3 months, or else he'll kill him, basically. And it's a really well done explanation scene, because you play as the brother in this prison escape. It's a badass scene. The drug lord guy seems like this really threatening, really awesome villain. So like you've got that, oh man, this guy's cool. Like I can't wait to see where this is gonna go. Later on, it will be revealed, spoilers by the way, this was all a complete lie. He was actually just released by Rafe and told to help them. He was just supposed to be helping Rafe find the treasure, but he basically abandoned Rafe to go find it on his own with Drake so that they could have it and fuck Rafe. And he made up all this story to get Drake involved, and Drake makes the critical mistake of leaving his wife Elena out of it. Now, this game does a great job of establishing Drake and Elena's marriage, where you have the scene where you walk around the house, just like at the start of The Last of Us, where you examine everything in their home. You kind of get a sense of how they've settled down into what is essentially like a very watered down version of their lifestyle. Like Drake is a diver who works for a salvage company, just like picking shit out of a river. Elena is now doing like travel guides. And it's really funny because I would think of these as exciting jobs. Like these are jobs that I feel like most people would consider to be relatively interesting jobs. But from the perspective of, you know, a high level journalist who like covers wars and shit, like civil wars in Syria, and a guy who's, you know, fucking seen apocalyptic mummy shit. That's I don't know why that's the phrase that came to mind to describe what he finds. This is a really boring life, you know, but the way that the game handles the idea that these two have settled down into a boring life, I like, because it would have been very easy to just be like, oh, Drake's bored of having to do paperwork, and like there's an element of that, but you really understand why he thinks that he should do this life, because he's kind of, it's not just for his wife or just to settle down. It's like he's really scared of becoming that reckless person again. He's afraid of, you know, getting into trouble. Like even more so, like even his wife is telling him to do, there's this job that the guy who's the manager of his salvage company wants to do, where some crash had happened off the coast of Malaysia, and there's like you know, a retirement money buried there, as he puts it. And, you know, if they could just go do this job, they'd have all this money, and it's a real easy job. It doesn't seem dangerous. Nobody else is after this treasure. And so Elena's like, why not just go ahead and do it? And Drake's like, because I don't really want to go down this slippery slope. It's like, I don't want to, like, he's trying to go cold turkey, basically. He's trying to be like, no, I'm just a normal guy now. There's nothing, no crazy shit, you know, nothing illegal. No, I don't want to do any of this shit. So, like, he's pushing himself too hard. And of course he would like to go on adventures again. Of course he's going to have fun if he goes out on these adventures again. But this isn't really about the struggle for Nate to fight his urge for adventure. It's about his fear of becoming the dangerous person that he used to be. You know, it's never presented to us like Nate's slipping. It's like the whole time he'd rather not be doing this. He's in denial of it. He's jaded to it. He's trying to, you know, he's trying to deny the fun that he's having. And his brother, meanwhile, has been in prison for 15 years and just wants to go on adventures. Like, he's basically living the life he felt he was promised all those years ago. He's, you know, finally chasing the treasures, and like his brother has been doing all this amazing shit the whole time that he's been in prison. So he wants to, you know, to catch up. And it's almost understandable why he would come up with the story to get Drake, you know, to get Nate to do this thing with him. Because it's like, after all that time, you know, how could he not take this opportunity to like finally do the thing that he felt like they were destined for, you know, that he's been stewing on for 15 years. He's obviously not going to let Drake just stay at home. But like both of these are, it's just a bunch of fatal miscommunications, you know, where like his brother Sam really should have, you know, he shouldn't have presented it this, like he was so desperate to get there before Rafe did that like he could have just worked with Rafe to get there. He could have involved Nate in a safer way. Like too much of his pride is mixed up in it, and that's why he comes up with this story and he leads everybody down this wrong path. And in Drake's case, like he shouldn't have lied to Elena, because if he had told her the same story that his brother had told him, she would have gotten involved. She would have wanted to help, and like, as Drake puts it when he finally finds the words later in the game, he's like, it wasn't necessarily that I was trying to protect you or anything. It's that I was trying to protect myself from losing you. I was just afraid that if I went on this adventure, then you would, not be okay with it and you would leave me. And it's like, everybody else knows that wouldn't be the case, and he just doesn't want to risk it, basically. But he should have brought her, because she's great at all this stuff, and like having her out for him, having his back is more beneficial. She also probably would have figured out about the lie. She probably would have done some research on the drug lord and figured out this whole situation, again, there is a lot of just like little things where it's like all this character had to do was say this and things would have gone very differently, and it's a little unreasonable. Like, I can't believe that Sully didn't figure out that the drug lord was dead or do research on that, considering he did some research on the job. That Rafe never said anything suggestive of the fact that Sam was supposed to have been working for him this whole time. That that seemingly Nate didn't even come home to see Elena before taking off on the Malaysia job. Like, why wasn't she just suspicious immediately? Just, there's, little things like that. And the biggest problem I have with the writing in this game is the usual issue of enemies don't just shoot each other. There's all these weird moments where people who've been trying to kill each other by proxy for hours and hours end up in standoffs where one person's got somebody else at gunpoint and just doesn't pull the trigger for long enough that something changes about the situation and they can get away. Or for whatever reason, Nate won't kill, what's her name? Nadine. Even though she's been sending men after him and we've literally gunned down like hundreds of her men. It's a little bit of, a good spot of the old Ludo narrative dissonance, if you will, which is actually a trophy I got in this game. I don't know what for. Maybe I just killed enough people and that was what got it. That would be funny if that is what it is. But like, yeah, it's really weird that in the cutscenes, like, Drake is always trying to spare people if he can, even though they're all trying to kill each other at all of the times. I don't get that. It seems like it'd be easy enough to write around, but whatever. So, thematically, the thing that interested me the most in this game was, and the only thing that's not really present in the text, is this idea of becoming jaded. That Drake is, he keeps trying to downplay how exciting this adventure is. And part of it is out of self-preservation, that he doesn't want to give into this life again. But it's also just that he's experienced a lot of this shit. And Sam keeps telling him, like, hey man, like, can't you just like appreciate what's going on here? Like, can't you just appreciate that this looks cool? Like, how jaded could you possibly be, And it felt like it was definitely speaking to the audience on some level. Like, talking about how we're on our 4th Uncharted game, like, we could just as easily be jaded and overly critical and just like, I've seen it all before. It's just another adventure. Who cares, But it's like, yeah, but enjoy this one, can't you just live in the moment here and like appreciate this? And as somebody who, I'm always fighting with that jadedness because, and a lot of people think that I am very jaded because it's so easy for me to not enjoy things. But like, I go out of my way to seek things that will, be exciting for me. And, for Drake, that would mean treasure hunting, but like sort of at the end of the game, what they find is a happy medium where Elena's like, hey, look, when we were on that adventure, it made me realize I don't want to fucking sit around at home and write travel guides. Like, we can do something a little more adventurous. It doesn't have to be dangerous. We don't have to be finding lost cities of gold, but like we don't have to be a fucking nuclear family. You know, like let's go do this Malaysia job, make a shitload of money, and then live somewhat exciting lives. And that's what they end up doing at the end. And it's such a great parallel scene where towards the beginning you walk around Nate and Elena's house, and I mean, it's cozy, it's comfy, it's a fine place, a nice 2-story in the suburbs, like there's nothing wrong with their living situation. But when you see their house at the end of the game and it's just this fucking badass big open ranch on the ocean, everything is set up just so. Nate's got his own workshop. They own a boating company. They're they're actively doing fun things. And it's like, this is the life you would expect Nate to retire to. You can't picture the man you played as in those first 3 games having the life that he has at the start of this game. And it's kind of funny that at the beginning you're kind of thinking of it as oh, they've settled down, they're trying to be mature, but the game actually tells you don't do that. This is a wrong-headed idea of maturity. This is not the final form. You should be doing what you love and being satisfied with your life and, living up to your own standards, basically. And that's kind of what they're doing at the end. And you play as their daughter for a little bit and, just run around and check out how cool their house is. And then she finds out that they've been adventurers, she finds a picture of Nate with a fucking shotgun next to Elena sitting on a pile of Spanish treasure. So yeah, I appreciated that message. I thought that was neat. I'm really glad that the game's message wasn't oh, Nate has to, resist the call to adventure to appease his wife. And I like that Elena's really the one who's kind of pressuring him to get back out there. I will say, though, that Elena is probably the least interesting character in this game simply because she has never had to learn or grow throughout this series. She's always just been kind of perfect. She's always just been totally in charge of the situation, making all the right decisions. There's never been a character flaw for her that would make her more interesting. She spends most of this game just looking fucking unbelievably depressed over the fact that she's been lied to, and you feel sorry for her and stuff, and she's clearly a great partner for Drake. We're sold on that she's a badass adventurer, she's a traveler, she's snarky and quippy like he is. I don't really know how they fell in love aside from the fact that they both like doing this kind of thing, which I guess is enough, because in the first game there's not really any budding relationship. They have chemistry insofar as they say snarky things to each other, but you never get the feeling that they're falling in love. They just kind of are together at the end. And then in each of the subsequent games they have split and are, rekindle the magic by the end just by way of, I guess, being swept up in the moment. So when you get to 4, it's okay, I see that they've settled down together, but what is the basis of this relationship really? But by the end, you're kind of more sold on the idea that okay, well, yeah, it is the adventure. It's the fact that these two like doing this kind of thing that has brought them together and will keep them together. But yeah, aside from that, you just don't really get a sense of what's Elena's deal beyond just being a badass and always right about everything. So, she ends up being a little less interesting than characters like Nate or Sam, who have really deep flaws, but, are still likable, and that's what makes them interesting, that you see all these problems and you're disappointed in them at moments, but in the end you still want to see them succeed. Although I will say Sam gets a little too off the hook considering how big of a lie he perpetuated against Nate, how he basically put his life in absurd amounts of danger and ruined all of his relationships, at least temporarily, for the sake of a lie. And he's not really held accountable for it at the end. He ends up becoming Sully's partner, which is fun. A fun idea. Just, maybe there could have been a little bit more Like, I get that everybody's just happy to have him alive, but very forgiving. I've seen a lot less forgiveness over a lot more petty of disputes in most of the brother relationships of people this age that I've witnessed in my life. So, just saying, they forgive each other pretty fucking easily. I've just been talking about the story this whole time, pretty much. So, I will also say of the story that the pacing is really good, like it was in the first two games, which I always said was the biggest strength of them. You open on a boat segment where there's a storm going on and you're piloting a boat and you're fucking knocking other boats out of the water. You crash land at the foot of an island. Your brother's there. So, like, not as memorable as the second game's opening, but still a solid way to start the game. But the more memorable part is when you go into your memories. So you do have an unfortunate section where you play as Kid Drake, just as a tutorial, escaping from the nunnery. I mean, it's nice to get more insight into his backstory. I think it's more well done than it was in the previous game, for sure. But it's mostly just a tutorial section. Let me tell you, you gotta make sure you have the instructions on the controls turned on, because in each of these games, I had initially just turned off tutorials, but in this game, the controls are somewhat different, and there were a couple of moments. There's particularly one moment where you're hiding from this nun while she's smoking a cigarette, and you have to sneak around this corner, and the game will not let you do anything other than this particular maneuver, which would have been on screen had I not turned off the tutorial mode. So I didn't know what the fuck I was supposed to do. I was just like, why do I keep getting stuck here? Like, I kept restarting the checkpoint thinking the game was glitched, not realizing that in this game you have to, like, particularly hold forward around the corner before you press circle to, like, switch which wall you're attached to. Which I did not use that much in combat because it's kind of a pain in the ass to figure out the. One of the problems I've had with all the Uncharted games is that, and that I keep forgetting to mention until now, thank God, is that what direction Nate moves depends on where your camera's facing. So he doesn't move forward when you press forward. He moves in whatever way is forward for the camera, which can get pretty confusing at certain camera angles, especially when you're in the middle of a firefight trying to switch cover. So, like, there are just moments where it's, like, difficult to figure out exactly which direction you need to be pressing a button in, or which face button you need to press. I did lose a certain number of lives in all of these games just to, like, fucking up the cover system, just, like, pressing the wrong button at the wrong moment or holding the wrong direction, him snapping to a different piece of cover than I expected. Always been a problem, but not like a game-ending one or anything. So you have that segment, then you get to the prison part, and that's probably the more memorable, very movie-esque bit of this game. And I'll even say I really appreciate how this game, again, starts off more like a movie, more like this one continuous, action set piece, cutscene romp, and then eventually opens up into more of a free form, exploration video game. But, like, the movie segments are well done. They're well shot, well acted, well choreographed. The characters are interesting. You want to know what's going on. Like, you're in prison. Why? And then you find out, oh, you're here to do you're here to steal something, and not the warden, but, like, one of the guards is actually a plant who's on your side, but he wants in, and your other guy stabs him to death, and you're like, oh my god, shit's going crazy. And then your fucking brother gets shot, and you're like, oh shit, how did he get out of that? And then you're at Drake's house, and now you're walking around the house, and you play Crash Bandicoot. I fucking hate Crash Bandicoot, but that's for another time. You're hanging out with Elena, and it's very obvious that the main reason they put Crash Bandicoot in there was to suck their own dick about how fucking amazing the graphics are, which they are. This game's only a couple years old, so unlike the others where I had that jadedness of having seen more modern of graphics, with this one it still looks incredibly modern. It's a little uncanny valley. Like, it's kind of too realistic. It's kind of creepy in a way. Like, in moments where the characters just look so real that they look like actors, but then there's something subtly wrong, and you're like, oh geez, This is fucking. This feels like the androids have like this is good enough to be a sex bot. Basically, is what I'm saying, but not good enough to convince you it's human. So it's in that slightly weird spot. But yeah, there's this moment where it's showing the game, and then it cuts to Drake and Elena on the couch in this like gorgeously lit shot, and it's like, ooh, look at fucking how far we've come. And but yeah, visual design and lighting is spectacular in this game. And I complained in the third one how, in spite of how good the graphics are, the art design just wasn't interesting. It just felt like realistic depictions of cities that were not inherently cool to look at. It was just hyper detailed for no purpose. In this game, you've got like the amazing lighting effects, scenes set at interesting times of day with interesting shadows being cast. There's the prison break sequence where you're playing as Sam that looks fucking super intense because you got all these like harsh lights against really dark shadows, and the situation is totally chaotic. It looks awesome. So, and you get a lot of that, especially in the early part of the game. The later part is more about the verdant forests and locations that you're exploring through. But gameplay-wise, how the gameplay plays into the visual design is really interesting, because the levels are all across the board are more open in this game. When you play Uncharted 1, if you're doing a climbing segment, it is a straight line. You see exactly where you need to go. You just gotta do the thing. In this game, there's a little bit more of branching paths. You might go a little ways and end up at a dead end, but from that dead end, you have a better view of the correct path, and you have like some kind of sweeping vista. So like they always organize the platforming in such a way that you don't realize you're coming up on an amazing vantage point of where you've been and where you're going. So just having that little bit of openness makes it feel so much more organic. It doesn't feel like you're just playing through a linear level, even though you are. It feels like you're just straight up exploring the place, and that just makes it feel way more engrossing, way more, what's the word I'm looking for? Immersive. That's the one. You feel like you're really fucking there. Particularly when you're on the island that takes up the second half of the game, because you explore so fucking much of it. And you even boat around it at first. So this game added open level segments. And first of all, let's drop calling them open world segments, because that makes no fucking sense. The whole idea of an open world game is that it's literally an open world where you can go anywhere at any time. This is not like that. It's just parts where the level is big and where you don't have to go on an exact linear path. But they're not like long sections, and there's not extra shit to do. You're still just going to the destination. Like, I mean, there might be some hidden treasures with some really light challenges. They actually made treasures have some purpose in this game, because there's unlockables tied to it, like unlockable costumes and stuff in the front menu. It's not the same as Tomb Raider though, and I'm sure that's what they were kind of copying, because it feels kind of like the secret tombs. But in Tomb Raider, there was gameplay implication for collecting things, because you got experience points and you could use that to level up your gear. So like there was a legitimate reason to try to 100% Tomb Raider while you're playing through it, like to go back through areas and try to get stronger. In this game, it's just kind of a bonus offshoot thing, and I was like, I don't feel incentivized enough to go out of my way to break the pacing of the story and find all this extra crap, but I'm sure some people would. But anyway, you got these big open sections where you drive around in a car or in a boat, and they just look amazing and feel great, and you cover a huge amount of distance, and you get kind of a sense of the place you're heading to from the outside. So like by the time you're done with the driving segment, you already feel like this strong sense of place, like you're there. And it also does what the second game did a lot of like starting you off far away, seemingly really far away from your destination. Like you see it in the skybox, it looks like you're miles away, and then you just travel there either by car or on foot. Like you're climbing all these ledges, you're really making your way over there. You keep looking up and seeing yourself getting closer, and the characters say like, oh look, it's right over there. And like it makes you feel like you've covered this enormous distance, because really the trick of it is that you have moments where you cover a huge amount, where, like, say a cliffside crumbles and then you swing with a rope, and you just covered, like, 20 meters. And then at other times you're just climbing up one little wall for, the same amount of time. And so, like, it causes you to lose your sense of place. You don't realize how far you've traveled until you've gotten there, and then you're always surprised by, like, wow, I really feel like I traveled all this way, even though you didn't do that much gameplay wise. You didn't spend most of that time actually traversing it, because most of it was stuff crumbling or just getting you closer by chance. Whatever the case, it makes you feel more in the setting. And even in 2, when I think the section that did this the best in 2 was the Nepal section, when you're in the city and you're making your way to the cathedral and you climb a building and you do all this crazy shit. But even then, in that game, again, it was so linear. It was always like you're in a locked off street and there's only one thing to do. In this game, if you were in a street, there would be, different vantage points you could climb to and overlook the whole place that you're in, and, like, just do something other than exactly what the sequence allows for. It's not a huge amount of openness. It doesn't make a gigantic difference, but you feel it. You emotionally feel more connected to the things that are going on and the setting that you're in, because it feels more real and alive. It feels like you had options, So yeah, there's lots of sections where you'll be like, maybe you'll drive up to a place that there's a shootout, and then you participate in the shootout, and then you get back in the car and drive to the next area, and the shootouts are just straight up the best they've ever been. Most of them are in big open areas where there's lots of stuff to climb on, grass to hide in, fuckloads of enemies who are all moving around organically. The AI is way the fuck better than it's ever been, because in all the other games, enemies just followed a scripted path. It was like, this guy stays up here, this guy stays over here. You have to figure out what's the best order to kill these guys in. The only thing they ever did was just advance on you. They never, like, moved around tactically or anything. In this game, if enemies spot you, they will, they'll continually move around. If you try to hide behind one piece of cover for too long, they're going to start flanking you. They're not just going to throw grenades, but they're going to, like, move around your sides. They're going to try to run away from you. Like, there's just a lot more going on in the firefights and to keep track of. So they're a lot harder, but a lot more fun, because it doesn't feel like you're just trying to do the same thing until you get it exactly right. It feels like you're trying something different each time. You're going, okay, well, that didn't work. What if I went around from the left? Okay, well, what if I climbed that tower first? All right, well, if I kill that group of guys over there with the rocket launcher, will I still be able to get the sniper? Like, who should I kill with which gun at what vantage point? And you could potentially stealth through all of these scenarios. I don't have the fucking patience for that, because there's usually a hell of a lot of enemies, and stealthing is really hard because all the enemies are moving around constantly and looking everywhere. And usually the fights start off in such a way that you see a lot of guys who you could easily stealth kill, but by the time you get to them, you'll realize that they're actually in line of sight of somebody else. So it's really tricky. If you want to stealth through, you'll have to really study the area, probably over multiple deaths, figure out where everyone is in relationship to everyone else, and take your time and do it real slow. I definitely would never have patience for that, because it's a lot easier to just gun your way through. Again, I played on hard mode. I died a lot, but I had a lot of fun. And, I would say that if I had one complaint, it's that not all of the guns feel that useful. And since there's enough availability of all of them, there's not a lot of situations that certain guns are the best in. You will usually try to, get just the guns you like the most, as opposed to whatever is best for the situation. But, nonetheless, there's a lot of rope swinging that you can do around battlefields, because they've introduced a rope swinging mechanic in this game. You can, there's battles that utilize water, where you can go underwater to evade enemies. There's one particular gunfight later in the game where they incorporate that, and just because they know you'll spend a lot of time underwater, they really went all out on making the underwater area look incredible. So yeah, like it's it's exciting when you're doing a cool gunfight and seeing some really cool looking shit at the same time. The locations of gunfights are just generally better. So yeah, I would say that not only is the platforming more open, more varied, you know, you again, you have the rope swinging, you also have like a pike you get later that you can stab into walls. Like, it just takes a little bit more thought and effort. It's not like just hold forward and press A like it usually was in the other games. You actually have to try to figure out the path a little bit. You actually have to press buttons with timing, you know, and swing from ropes and shit. It's nothing super advanced. It's not really a massive test of skill of your platforming ability. Just feels better. It feels less gamey and more immersive, even though it's still a fun game. And you know, the level design's better, the visuals are better, the gunplay is way the fuck better. So yeah, just generally all around, I would say the gameplay is great. Now the scripted sequences, surprisingly, there's not as much crazy scripted sequences as there were in the second game. But there is one huge midpoint thing that is fucking awesome. And it's where you have to drive this truck or Jeep. I don't remember what you're driving, but you drive this, I think Jeep, down through the streets of this city, and you're running from this big like tank. Not a tank, but like, you know, one of those big fucking military vehicles with a turret on it. And you just kind of lay waste to this whole fucking city in Madagascar trying to escape from this thing. And it looks awesome. You're covering a huge amount of ground, so the level feels gigantic. Shit's blowing up and going crazy. I think it was probably inspired by a scene from Bad Boys 2. Now, I haven't actually seen that movie, but I've seen like clips of the part where they just like fucking destroy this whole town. You know, and it looks awesome. And then you transition straight from that onto a part where you're fucking on a rope hanging on the back of a car that's going over a bridge, and you're dodging debris in the lake, and then you're being dragged behind the car and shooting enemies off the things. And then it basically becomes another one of those sections where you are hopping from vehicle to vehicle. But thankfully, it's more like the second game than the third game, where there's actually some tactics involved. You actually have to, like, you know, concentrate on which enemies to fire at. But even better is that you're not just switching from vehicle to vehicle, but you're taking over some of the vehicles as this goes on. So once again, like the great segment, you know, the train segment in 2, you've got the environment that continually looks like you're in new places. So it just feels like you're in this unbelievably fucking huge chase scene where you're commandeering vehicles, swinging on ropes between vehicles, knocking guys off. Like, it's the final form of this thing that they've been doing since the beginning. You know, you've had this segment more or less in each game in some form. This is the best possible version of it. So that was really exciting. And that is kind of the big set piece moment. Like, you've got lots of the little, you know, usual things that happen in all these games. You know, there is another running from a tank scene kind of, but it's not nearly as crazy as the one from the second game. So I would say that as far as crazy scripted sequences go, Uncharted 2 might still be the high watermark for the series. I mean, nothing in this, as exciting as that one scene was, because there have already been so many sections in these games of being on top of trucks, and there's only been one part where you do a crazy train thing, I think the train is still the most impressive set piece in these games. But Uncharted 4, again, it's just more fixated on great level design. It's more fixated on exploring, getting to know the location. And when you finally go to Avery's Island, and like, you're driving this boat around all these islands trying to figure out which one is the correct one to go to. You arrive at the place, you explore the base of it, you climb all the way up this huge fucking island, you eventually make it to this destroyed colony, then you have to go from one side of the island to the other to get to the rich part, then you're exploring these, you know, disheveled mansions that are half sunken, and then finally making it to Avery's place and like piecing together this whole story of what's going on there. It's just easily the most exciting that any of these games has been. I would say I enjoyed it a lot more than even The Last of Us, which I think is a pretty good game. And shout out, by the way, to E Hill, a patron of mine who is a level designer for Naughty Dog, working on The Last of Us 2, who's listening to these, who said he couldn't wait for me to talk about The Last of Us. I'm not planning to cover The Last of Us in this series. This is just about Uncharted. Really, the only reason I did all of this is that I wanted to play Uncharted 4. Like, I'd heard good things about it. It looked cool. I wanted to play it, but I wanted to play all the other 3 first. And when I got my PS4, I got it with the Nathan Drake collection, and I got Uncharted 4 not long afterwards. It took me like 4 years to finally get around to fucking playing all this shit. So, yeah, I basically just played all these games so I could play Uncharted 4, and I just did podcasts about them because I had thoughts about them. But I did do a podcast on The Last of Us back when it came out on the Digibro After Dark channel. If you just search Digibro The Last of Us, I'm sure you can find it. So if you wanted to hear my thoughts as of having just played the game, I think I did it with my brother, who had also played through it. So, you know, I already got my thoughts on that game out there, but whereas I think that game improved a lot of things over Uncharted in terms of like having better gunplay, better dramatic storytelling, cinematography, things like that, characterization. I really think that Uncharted 4 took a lot of the best elements of that and just put it in a package that resonates with me better. I think the level design's a lot better. I think the pacing is a hell of a lot better, because I don't think the pacing of The Last of Us is all that solid. And that the characters are just better. I think they're more interesting and more nuanced, partly because we've had so much time to build them. But like, really, most of Drake's development happens in this game. Like, most of him becoming an interesting character really happens here, and just crafting such a specific character, someone who really is like a larger-than-life figure. He's not just a generic treasure hunter anymore. He's a character with a whole mythos, a backstory, like a life that we can observe in full. He's become like an actual comic book character now, you know, like a fully-fledged one who's existed for a long time. So, you know, turning him into a worthy gaming protagonist, I think, might be the best thing this damn game could be remembered for. So, I'm trying to think if there's any more specifics I really want to dive into. I mean, the game still has... I would still say there are some minor issues I have with the game. Just like occasional frustrations in combat. It's obviously not the most fun game in the world, because like, while the gameplay is good, and I think that it's a fun experience overall, it's neither the most interesting story nor the most interesting gameplay in a game, nor even the most interesting combination of the two that's out there. So it's not like I'm going to say this is like one of the greatest games of all time, but I would definitely give it like a strong 8 to a light 9. I thoroughly enjoyed myself. I think I would play it again, you know, in the future. This is, honestly, this is the only Uncharted I would return to now that it exists. Like, having played through the original 3, I'm glad I did, because I know I won't go back to them when this one is so much more satisfying and just fulfilling to play. You know, it really felt like the final form of the Uncharted experience. I will say that, again, because it doesn't have as many big set pieces as 2, I don't think as much of the game will stand out in my memory. It does improve on things like having better puzzles than, you know, 3 had, because, again, the puzzles are tied to the narrative of the game, which is about all these pirates. So you've got all this cool pirate imagery, like this repeated use of the sigils. Like, there's just more meaning to the puzzles than there was in the last one. It doesn't feel like just random abstract symbols with no purpose. It's like you actually, you know, there's like a tactile connection to the story, and the game doesn't have as many of them. There's only a few puzzles, mostly in the first half of the game. The second half of the game is really just like this nonstop ascent of this island, and, you know, continuing this push and pull of the plot with Sam and Nate, trying to, you know, simultaneously having fun and getting to know each other again after 15 years, but then having this epic betrayal. Elena comes back, Sully comes back, you got the whole gang at the end. It's a picturesque finale. Oh yeah, I do gotta complain about the final boss. So I haven't really talked about Rafe that much. I think Rafe is a great character. He's not terribly complex, but he makes sense. I like that he is intelligent, he's brutal, he's an asshole, but he's not like unreasonable or stupid. You get the sense that he is legitimately threatening, and he definitely seems like he's supposed to look like a young Tim Roth. I think that's what they based him on. And I think that because he looks like Tim Roth, they tried to make the final battle a reference to the movie Rob Roy. Because you have a sword fight at the end that's Rob Roy-esque, although it takes place in a burning ship with a bunch of gold in it, which might be in reference to the end of Ninja Scroll. So I think they were going for Rob Roy meets Ninja Scroll at the end. That's my theory. E-Hill, if you've heard anything about this, if you can ask somebody at the office and confirm in the comments, let me know. Were they trying to make Rob Roy meets Ninja Scroll? Whatever the case is, the final battle, as tends to be the case in Uncharted games, has nothing to do with the control scheme of the game you've been playing up to this point, which infuriates me. So the end of the first game had a fucking QuickTime event that I remember the first time I played the game on the higher difficulties, I really struggled with. I could not nail the timing on this fucking thing. I hate QuickTime events. And thankfully, there almost aren't any in this game. The only times that there's something resembling them, it uses the regular controls of the game. So for instance, you might slide down a long embankment and then at the end have to jump and quickly rope a ledge. And it's like, yeah, well, I already know to rope with L1, so, like, that comes naturally. It's not like a button suddenly shows up that I have to press to make this thing happen, which happens a lot in all three of the other games. Well, there's not, like, a crazy amount of QuickTime events, but there's always been enough to annoy me. In the second game, the final boss was actually good, Lazarevich. He just chases you around and you shoot at him. It's pretty much the normal controls. It's pretty tough, but it's doable, It could be frustrating because it took a long time, but it was at least, it functioned like the game that you had been playing up to that point. The third game has a stupid fist fight that sucks. This game has a stupid sword fight that sucks. And the reason it sucks is that when Rafe attacks you, if he's attacking from the left, you press triangle, and if he's attacking from the right, you press square, and these are the only buttons you can use in this fight, except you have to mash, or not square, you press circle when he comes from the right, and you mash square when you're attacking him. First of all, it's not clear whether you can damage him by pressing square at first, because you really have to only attack him after you've blocked a certain number of his attacks, and then a square button pops up next to him, and that's the only time you're actually doing damage. So, even though, like, sometimes when you do attack him, like, it initiates a kind of sequence as though you were going to hurt him, it's annoying. Eventually I figured out just don't press square at all. But you press triangle and circle, but the problem is that circle normally is the roll, like the dodge roll / get behind cover. So instinctively, when I start taking a lot of damage, I want to roll away. And so I keep trying to press circle to roll, but circle is block strike from the right. Now, while he does telegraph his attacks, they also are often deliberate misdirects. And you can't always tell which direction he's supposed to be coming from, because sometimes it looks like he's coming from the right, but it counts as a left strike because of, I don't know, just the way his hand is. Like, you basically just have to memorize what each gesture means in order to do this fight. And I just got fucking fed up with it. I died a whole bunch, and I was really pissed off, and I just kicked the game down to easy mode, and that made it, like, basically in slow motion. So that made it pretty easy to beat. But yeah, I literally got so frustrated that I kicked the difficulty down on the final boss, just because I was like, why am I suddenly dealing with this control scheme? And, like, I wanted to like this sequence because the idea of it is cool. I like the endings of Rob Roy and fucking Ninja Scroll, so I like the idea here. But it was, it just wasn't that well executed. Also, this fight has one of the groaner sort of bits of dialogue where he's ranting about how he's not going to lose the treasure to some 2-bit thieves, a senile con artist, and a washed up journalist. If you want to hang out with all those losers, you can go ahead, but I'm going to be a cool guy. And it's just like, all right, like, I get that he's kind of unraveling here in frustration, but this is a kind of a cheesy way to go about that. Like, I think he should have been more pissed, more vicious, you know, because he's a fucking psycho. Like, we saw him stab a guy towards the beginning of the game. Like, I like that he's usually trying to be, like, kind of aloof and, like, he wants to come off as, like, a cool badass, but really he, you know, loses his temper and goes into this hot-headed, insane rage. But, like, there needed to just be more insane rage. The other big groaner in the game is when you have to leave Elena towards the end to go after Sam, and she's like, it's not fair. The dishes, we take turns. You better make it back so you can do the dishes. Stop it. Stop. Why? All the other dialogue in this game was so much more realistic. Why would you throw in the super fucking corny shit at the end that no one would ever say? Yeah, like, just it's like they felt, it's like I said about the third game when I said they asked themselves what they could do, not whether they should. That's how I feel about that line. Really cheesy, groaner, but you know, overall, I thought the dialogue was great, and the writing was good, and the story was good, and the game was good. So yeah, I'd give it a strong 8 to a light 9. I enjoyed myself. I think it's the best one. I am curious to play the spin-off game. I don't own it, and I'm kind of Uncharted out for now. I have been playing this all week. My mind feels like Uncharted. When I walk around, I feel like I'm doing Drake's walk cycle, just because it's so realistic that it just feels like real life. So it's fucking with my brain. I keep hearing the stupid music in my head. So yeah, I think I'll probably hold off for a little bit before I play the other Uncharted. But I'm glad I took this journey. I feel like it was all justified by getting to play Uncharted 4 and to see the evolution of these games. And it definitely was, it was a big salve after playing the third one, which I really hated. So yeah, thanks for everybody who listened to all these Uncharted videos. I hope you enjoyed. And I'll see you later. Check out Tom's videos that he posts on this channel, because I might not post here for a little while.